Getting a divorce? Find out the legal system's best kept secret to making the process easier and the outcome happier on Toronto Speaks Legal Advice. Welcome to Toronto Speaks Legal Advice. I'm your host, Natalka Falcomer. Tonight we're discussing what you need to know if your relationship is falling apart. I have the pleasure of welcoming into the studio tonight one of Toronto's best family lawyers and biggest advocates for simplifying the legal process. We'll be speaking with Andrew Feldstein, a family lawyer who was honored with an inaugural appointment to the Dispute Resolution Officer panel for Newmarket. Andrew sits on various committees aimed towards reforming family law. He mentors law students and is frequently interviewed by the media because of his expertise in family and collaborative law. Andrew, I could not have you on at a better time because the newspapers are all screaming divorce. But really, how to get out splitting a lot of that family money, if you will. So we're looking at, and also I see that you also commented and were quoted in a lot of these newspapers with respect to this big scandal that's happening right now, where Eleanor McCain and Jeff Melanson, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, are seeking to split up. But Eleanor is making a claim that their marriage can be annulled. Why is she doing that?
Well, it's very simple. If you're married, you're obligated to make an equalization payment.
Okay.
Which is where two spouses, in essence, have to share their increased value of their cumulative assets during their marriage, subject to certain exceptions. And if you're annulled, if your marriage is annulled, it means you never got married, and you don't need to make that equalization payment.
How do you reach the threshold or the test of, yes, this marriage was in fact not formed properly and therefore can be annulled? When can you call in that legal argument?
Well, there's technical reasons why you can. So, for example, you'd be successful at getting an annulment if you found out that your other spouse was married.
Oh, interesting.
That would be one reason. But
in a different country, or does it have to be all within Canada?
It would be it depends on the country, and that gets a lot more complex. But if you wanted to focus it on the simplest aspect, you go to get married in Ontario, and somehow you get married in Ontario, and you found out that your spouse was actually married elsewhere, then your marriage would be void. So there's an example of an annulment.
Right.
But there's fraud is one ground.
Fraud as in fake name, or you said you had more money?
Well, the fraud, I think, would be more along the lines of you represent that you're not married and you are married. Another ground would be lack of capacity. You don't appreciate the understanding of what it is to get married.
What does that mean? Like,
you lack the mental capacity to get married. So
because you drink a lot?
No, it's because it's a good question. Maybe some people make that mistake, but it's more along the lines of you have certain challenges that put you in a position that you cannot enter into a contract because you don't have that capacity. Easiest example would be a child can't enter into a contract. Same idea. Another idea is you lack the capacity to consummate the marriage. Okay,
and what would that be? If we can say it's PG-13 as possible.
Well, that probably is about as PG-13 as possible.
Got it. Oh my God. I'm trying to think of how other ways that we can kind of go around that one. Now, back to the lacking of capacity. So let's say I get married with someone who is a rampant alcoholic or drug abuser. And I say, you know what? When we got married, you clearly did not have the capacity to understand what you were doing. You're maybe under the influence at the time. Would that be a good reason for an annulment?
No, not at all.
Why?
Because that person did have the capacity to understand what they were doing. They had the capacity to consummate the marriage. That marriage would be a valid marriage. The problems that you're looking for to get a marriage annulled are very, very challenging with a very high threshold. And it's very rare in the cases I read when I read my weekly newsletters to see any cases where there's been a successful annulment. I can think of one case in the last maybe 15 or 20 years I've read of in Ontario where someone actually got an annulment.
And what is the claim that Eleanor is making?
Well,
on what ground she's saying it should be annulled?
Well, she's saying she was misled into the marriage. I don't think that is something that's going to be able to get her to the finish line of annulment. One can question of whether or not it's there for a negotiating purpose to get a better deal. But at the end of the day, Her argument may be better grounded as it's an unconscionable equalization payment.
Ah, what does that mean, an unconscionable equalization payment?
Well, under the Family Law Act, the court has the ability to say an equalization payment may shock the conscience of the court.
What would be an example?
Well, if it's too much money, if somebody's married 1 year and the equalization payment is $10 million, that may shock the conscience of the court.
Yes.
So that's varied with someone who has to pay $50,000 for a 1-year marriage. That's not going to shock the conscience of the court. But unconscionability is a very, very high threshold to reach as well. And if you're married, the longer you're married, and especially if it's over 5 years, you're probably not, it gets even harder to achieve that objective, because one of the grounds would be if you're married less than 5 years.
Is that a legislated number, or is that something that case law typically kind of says?
That's a legislated number, but it includes common law years.
Okay, includes common law.
So if you've lived together with someone for 4.5 years and then you get married, at 6 months, you lose the ability to argue unconscionability.
And for the common law portion of that equation, do the two people have to be living together?
Yes.
Okay, so you have to physically be living, and then that adds on to those.
But physically living together isn't even the same definition that a lot of people think physically living together.
What does that mean? We have way too much to cover today. Of course, to our viewers at home, if you have any questions, if you're going through a divorce, a separation, you don't know what to do about your child because of a divorce that you're in, please give us a call today. We're more than happy to answer your questions, as we do have the expert on with us today. But go ahead about that question.
Well, some people will think I have to physically move in to be living together. But in this day and age, two people could be living in a common law relationship in different countries and commuting and visiting each other regularly. It could be spending 3-4 nights a week together. It has a
even if separate addresses, separate mailing addresses?
Well, it depends on a fact-by-fact case of that particular case in question.
Right.
So if, I'll give an example, if one person lives and works in downtown Toronto and the other person lives, let's say, in Barrie.
Right.
And every weekend they stay at that person's home in Barrie. And all the vacations they take together and all the holiday periods they take together, there's a good argument to say, well, the only reason that person is living downtown is we're basically married, but it's close to work for them.
Yeah, it's convenient during the work week, and they call every weekend or every day of the work week.
And then they come in to stay in their home that's close to work, say on Monday morning. They drive in, and then they leave Friday after work. Or it may be a Monday to Thursday work week for that person.
Really?
All of a sudden, that may sound a lot like living common law.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying that may sound to a lot of people a lot like living common law. And then, well, did they put the other person on their benefits at work, saying they're a spouse? Did they put them in their will? And you dig further and you may say, yeah, that sounds a lot like a married couple.
Exactly. You know, it's fascinating how we have about a minute and a half to our first break, but how I find, and I'm sure you come across this a lot, and we'll be touching upon this more after the break, that the legal system is much more nuanced than we actually believe, and that, in fact, not getting married does not necessarily mean that you have avoided all your responsibilities potential underneath the law and any sort of relationship, particularly as it comes to children.
Absolutely correct.
Yes. Before we spit off the break, 1 minute to say, what's another way this Mrs. McCain could have avoided her inheritance perhaps being gobbled up by her spouse?
Well, the inheritance would be excluded, but if you're in the McCain family, I'm assuming it means you have a high net worth. And that would mean her net worth probably significantly increased during the marriage, and the best way to protect it would have been a marriage contract.
Ah, see, and that's the famous prenup.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, that we talk about, and we're about 30 seconds in. Difference, one sentence, one soundbite, prenup versus marriage contract, same or different?
Same thing.
Exactly, except prenup is what we always hear in America, because apparently American news and everything seems to dominate us. But
we call it a marriage contract.
Yeah, exactly, a marriage contract.
Or cohabitation agreement.
Yes, which of course nobody likes to talk about, but is so important because you never know what can happen.
Well.
And of course, when we come back, you'll not only watch lawyers do something very incredible, give away free legal information with no bill, but you'll also get the insider tips you need to avoid a needlessly expensive and emotionally damaging divorce or separation.